The chamber was dark, the air was heavy, and the alien girl's heart was beating like a drum. She had been dragged into this place by chains, cold iron pressing against her skin. Her people had whispered terrible things about humans. They said humans eat their enemies. They said humans enjoy watching others suffer, and now she was face to face with one. Her name was not important to the humans. At least that was what she thought. To them she was just another prisoner, another trophy of war. Her tall frame was bent low, her bright eyes full of fear, her hands trembling as the guards left her inside the silent room. The door closed with a metallic thud, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She had heard his name before, Caldwell, the human soldier, the warrior who never lost. Other prisoners spoke of him in whispers. Some said he was a beast, some said he was a shadow. Others said he could look inside your soul with his eyes. She tried to be strong, but the stories crawled through her mind like sharp claws, and fear covered her heart like ice. Then the footsteps came, slow, steady, powerful. Each step echoed against the walls. She lifted her head and she saw him. He was taller than she expected, his shoulders wide, his face carved like stone. But his eyes were different. They were not wild. They were calm, too calm, like the still water before a storm. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her breath short, her body shaking. She thought, "This is it. He will eat me. He will tear me apart." She had seen humans tear through battlefields, their fire, their machines, their endless strength. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a small prayer to the stars, hoping her end would be quick. But then something strange happened. Caldwell did not attack. He did not roar or show his teeth. He simply stopped in front of her, standing silent, watching her with those calm eyes. The silence was so heavy that it pressed against her chest. She could not hold her breath. She could not understand. What was he waiting for? He raised his hand. She flinched, expecting claws, expecting sharp steel, but instead, his hand opened slowly. A human hand. Strong but not cruel, his fingers reached toward her face. She froze, waiting for pain, waiting for blood. But instead she felt warmth, gentle warmth on her skin. The touch was soft, careful, almost kind. Her eyes shot open, shock racing through her. She did not move. She did not breathe. This was not what the stories told her. Humans were supposed to be monsters. Yet here was one touching her like she was fragile glass. She whispered inside her mind, "Why? Why is he doing this? Why does he not kill me?" Caldwell's face did not change. His eyes studied her carefully, as if he was reading a book written on her skin. The alien girl tried to speak, but her voice broke into silence. Her heart was still racing, but another feeling, a strange feeling, began to grow. Confusion. She wanted to scream. She wanted to push him away, yet she could not. He stepped back, his boots making a small sound on the floor. Then he reached to his side. She thought he was pulling out a weapon. Her body tensed, her throat dry, but instead he pulled out something small. A piece of food, a simple ration from his pack, and he placed it in front of her on the ground. The alien girl stared at it, her mind screaming, "This must be a trick. Humans fatten their prey before they eat them. Yes, that must be it." Her fear grew again, but at the same time her hunger burned inside her. She had not eaten for days. Her body wanted to reach for the food, but her mind said no. It is poison. It is a trap. Caldwell turned and walked to the other side of the room. He sat down on a bench, his back leaning against the wall, his face calm as ever. He said nothing, not a single word. He simply waited. Watching her with quiet eyes, the silence grew again, wrapping around them like a cold fog. The girl finally took the food with shaky hands. She brought it to her mouth, her eyes never leaving him. She expected him to smile in cruelty, to laugh at her weakness, but he did not. He just watched, calm and still, like he was waiting for her to make her own choice. Her lips touched the food, and she swallowed slowly, fear still alive, but mixed with another feeling she could not name. That was the moment she realized something. Caldwell was not like the stories. He was not the monster her people described. He was something else, something more dangerous, because he was unpredictable. And in that silence, in that simple act of kindness, he made her question everything she thought she knew about humans. She lowered the food, her eyes still locked on him, the question burning inside her mind. What is he planning? Why am I still alive? The chamber was still dark, the air still heavy, but the fear inside her was no longer pure. It was mixed with curiosity, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The night passed slowly. The alien girl sat in the corner of the chamber, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes fixed on the human across the room. He had not moved much. He had not spoken. He just sat there like a statue, breathing calm, steady, almost as if he were sleeping with his eyes half open. She hated how quiet he was, because silence was more frightening than noise. Every sound from outside the chamber echoed in her ears. The distant clank of metal, the hum of human machines, the low vibration of their strange power sources. She had been raised to believe these were sounds of death, yet the man called Caldwell seemed untouched by them. He was like a piece of stone placed in the middle of a storm, never shaken, never broken. She tried to convince herself that this was still a game. He was waiting for the right moment. He would strike when her guard was low. That was what monsters did. They played with their food. They enjoyed the fear more than the kill. But the hours passed and nothing happened. No strike, no laughter, no cruelty, just calm. At last he moved, slow and measured. His eyes shifted toward her, and for a moment her heart stopped. She pressed harder into the wall, her nails scratching the surface, her mind screaming. Not yet. Not now. But he did not approach. Instead, he stood and walked to the far side of the chamber where a small container rested. He pulled out a flask of water, opened it, and placed it halfway between them on the floor. She blinked. Her breath stuck in her throat. She did not understand. Water was rare in captivity. It was controlled, rationed, sometimes withheld as punishment, but he left it there in reach, then sat back down, his face as unreadable as ever, she thought. Is this mercy? Or another test? Her throat ached, dry from fear and hunger. Her body demanded she crawl forward and drink, but her pride screamed, no, she would not beg from a human, she would not show weakness. So she sat there staring at the flask, staring at him, waiting for him to smirk, waiting for him to show the cruelty behind his calm mask. Minutes turned into hours. The water stood untouched between them, yet his gaze never mocked her. His eyes were calm, not sharp, not cruel, just calm. And that was what disturbed her most, because she could not tell if he was pretending or if this was truly who he was. Finally, she moved, slow like a shadow, her hands trembling as she reached for the flask, her eyes locked on him, ready for a trap. But nothing happened. No sudden move, no strike, just silence. She lifted the flask to her lips and drank, the cold liquid rushing into her mouth, down her throat, each drop both comfort and fear because she realized he had given her life instead of taking it. When she lowered the flask, her eyes burned with suspicion, she whispered under her breath, "Why?" The word slipped out without her meaning it, but he heard. His head tilted slightly, though his face remained calm. He did not answer, not with words. Instead, he simply nodded once, slow and sure, as if to say, "Because you need it." Her chest tightened, anger mixing with confusion. She wanted him to shout, to reveal his plan, to be the monster her people described. But his silence was heavier than any chain. She hated that it made her feel safe, and she hated even more that part of her wanted to believe him. The hours stretched longer, and she began to notice things about him, small things. His hands were scarred, not from cruelty but from battles fought. His armor was worn but cared for, polished where it mattered. His eyes, though calm, carried shadows, as if he had seen too much, survived too much. She wondered if humans were cruel because of their strength, or because of the pain they carried inside. At one point he pulled a small device from his belt, pressed a button, and soft light filled the chamber. It was not harsh, not blinding, just warm light, and in that light she saw his face more clearly. She expected to see hunger in his expression. The kind of hunger her people warned about, but instead she saw something else, something closer to sadness, and that confused her more than anything. She whispered again, "What do you want from me?" Her voice cracked like broken glass, the question hung in the air, but once again, Caldwell gave no answer. He only looked at her, eyes steady, and for a moment she thought he pitied her. And pity was worse than cruelty, because pity meant he saw her as weak, fragile, less than him. And yet, when she looked deeper, she saw it was not pity. It was patience, like a hunter waiting, but not for prey, more like a teacher waiting for a student to understand. And that made her heart twist in ways she could not name. The night finally ended, the light dimmed, and the chamber returned to shadow. But something inside her had changed. She no longer thought only of death, no longer thought only of fear. Now she thought of questions. Questions she did not want, questions she could not stop. Questions about who humans really were, and why this one man refused to be the monster she expected. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, her mind replayed the calmness of his face, the patience of his silence, the warmth of his hand, and the cold water that saved her throat. She hated him for not killing her. She hated him for making her doubt, and deep inside, she feared the most dangerous thing of all. She feared she was beginning to trust him. The alien girl did not remember falling asleep, but when her eyes opened, she saw him still there, Caldwell, sitting with his back against the wall, his head lowered, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a statue carved out of stone, yet his chest rose and fell with slow breaths, calm, steady, like the rhythm of the universe itself. For a long moment, she only watched him, her mind caught between fear and curiosity. No chains tied her hands, no blade pressed against her throat, yet she felt trapped by questions, trapped by the way his silence forced her to think. Her people had told her humans were loud, brutal, and wild, but this one, he was quiet, too quiet, and silence was dangerous. When he lifted his head, his eyes met hers, and she felt the same chill as before, but this time, there was no sharp edge in his gaze, only patience, only calm. She hated how it made her feel, like she was being studied, like he wanted to understand her instead of destroy her. That was worse because monsters were easy to hate, but patience was harder to resist. He stood, slow as always, and walked toward her. She tensed, pressing back against the cold wall, but his hands were empty, his steps steady. He crouched in front of her and placed something on the ground. Not food this time, not water, but a small device, round and smooth, glowing faint blue. She frowned, unsure, and her fear whispered, "Is it a weapon? Is it a trick?" He pressed a button and the device flickered, projecting a soft light, and in that light appeared moving shapes. Colors, sounds. She gasped because it was music, not like the sharp tones of her people's war drums, but soft, gentle, flowing like water. She had never heard such a sound before. Her heart froze, then beat faster, the sound wrapping around her like warmth. Caldwell did not speak. He only let the device play, the music filling the silent chamber. She looked at him, then at the light, then back at him, confusion storming inside her. Why would a human show her this? Why would he share beauty instead of fear? She had no answer, but the music planted something inside her chest, something fragile, something unwanted. For the first time since her capture, she felt the corner of her mouth move, not fully, not freely, but almost into a smile. She stopped herself quickly, her pride roaring. No, she must not show weakness. She must not give him that, yet inside the music lingered, and no wall of pride could push it away. The days passed slowly, and each day he gave her something different. One day he gave her clean cloth to wrap around her wounded arm. Another day he set the device to show images of forests, skies, oceans of earth, places she had never seen. Each time she wanted to refuse, to spit, to stay cold, but her body betrayed her. Her eyes watched, her ears listened, her wounds healed. She noticed his hands again, scarred and rough, but careful when he cleaned her wounds. His fingers strong yet gentle. He never rushed, never hurt her more than necessary, and she thought, how can the same hands that carry weapons also carry such care? It made no sense, and the more she thought about it, the more the walls inside her mind began to crack. One evening, when the chamber was darker than usual, she whispered a word without planning to. "Why?" Her voice was thin, her throat tight. She almost regretted saying it. But it was too late. The word was in the air. Caldwell looked at her, his face still unreadable. And then he spoke, his voice deep but soft. "Because you are alive." The words hit her harder than any weapon. She stared at him, her lips parting, but no sound came. She wanted to argue, to accuse him of lying, but she could not, because his voice carried no sharpness, only truth, and truth was harder to fight than cruelty. Her walls cracked more that night, and though she told herself to rebuild them, she knew it was too late. Once cracks appear, light finds its way in, and his calmness, his patience, his strange mercy was already shining inside her heart. She hated it, but she could not stop it later. When she lay down to rest, she remembered the music, the images of forests, the feel of clean cloth on her skin, and the sound of his voice saying she was alive. Her people had always told her humans were destroyers, beasts of war. But this one human was proving them wrong, or worse, he was proving them half right, because maybe humans could destroy, but they could also heal. And that was the most dangerous truth of all, because if humans were only monsters, she could fight them, she could hate them, she could resist until her last breath. But if humans could also be kind, gentle, and merciful, then the war was not as simple as she had been taught. Then her heart would have to choose, and choices were always harder than hatred as sleep finally pulled her into its grip. She whispered inside her mind, not for him, but for herself. "Who are you?" "Caldwell." And though he gave no answer, the silence that followed felt different now, not like a prison, but like a door waiting to be opened. The chamber was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt like a blade. It felt different now, softer, slower, almost like the calm after a storm. The alien girl sat on the floor, her knees tucked close, her eyes watching the human who had become the center of her thoughts. Caldwell, the warrior she had once feared as a monster, now seemed less like an enemy and more like a puzzle she could not solve. He was not speaking, as usual, but every movement he made carried weight. When he stood, he moved with strength, but never rushed. When he set down food or water, he did it gently. When his eyes met hers, they were steady, never mocking, never cruel. And that steadiness was the very thing that unsettled her, because it felt safer than anything she had ever known. That day he did something new. He pulled from his pack a thin blanket. Worn but clean, he placed it near her without a word, then stepped back, sitting against the wall like always. She looked at it with suspicion first, her pride telling her to reject it, to throw it back at him. But her body betrayed her again. The cold of the chamber bit into her skin, and the thought of warmth was too tempting. She picked it up slowly, her eyes never leaving his, and wrapped it around herself. The fabric was rough, but it carried heat, and with it came a strange feeling she could not explain, a feeling of being cared for. She had been told humans were destroyers, that they only took, but this human was giving, piece by piece, day by day, and her heart did not know how to fight that. The warmth of the blanket spread through her, and for the first time she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear, not because the danger was gone, but because she began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he would not harm her while she slept. It was a dangerous thought, a dangerous trust, but it slipped inside her like a seed planting itself in soil. When she opened her eyes again, Caldwell was closer. Not too close, but enough that she could see the details of his face, the lines of old battles, the calm strength in his jaw, the quiet sadness in his eyes. She wondered if he knew how his silence was breaking her walls, if he knew how every small act of mercy was changing her. He reached out again, his hand slow, deliberate, and she froze, not out of pure fear this time, but out of confusion. She expected the touch to bring control, to bring chains, but when his fingers brushed her arm, it was gentle, softer than the blanket she wore. He pressed lightly against the bandage he had tied days ago, checking it, making sure her wound was healing. Her breath caught in her throat because this touch carried no cruelty, only care. The alien girl lowered her gaze, her chest heavy with emotions she did not want, and she whispered almost too soft for him to hear, "Why do you do this?" It was the question that haunted her since the first night. He could have ended her easily, yet he gave her water, gave her food, gave her warmth, gave her touch that did not hurt. She could not understand. Caldwell did not answer with many words. He never did, but his voice came deep and steady. "Because pain is not all we are." The word struck her harder than any blow. Her people had painted humans as creatures of endless pain, endless violence. But this man spoke as if mercy was just as much a weapon as any blade. Her heart thudded in her chest, anger and something else twisting together. She wanted to hate him for saying such things, because if he was right, then her people's war was built on lies. But at the same time, she wanted to believe him because the warmth in her body, the safety she felt in his presence, was too real to deny. She looked at him again, this time not as a monster, but as a man, and she saw how tired he was, how the scars on his hands told stories of battles he never asked for, and how his eyes carried weight heavier than any chain. And she realized something dangerous. Maybe he was healing her, but maybe she was also healing him. The thought terrified her, because it meant their connection was not one-sided. It meant she was no longer only a prisoner. She was becoming part of something else, something fragile but powerful, a bond. And bonds were dangerous, because bonds could change wars as the hours passed. She found herself leaning against the wall, the blanket wrapped around her, the warmth of his earlier touch still lingering on her skin. She did not want to admit it, but it gave her comfort. It gave her a strange pleasure. Not the cruel pleasure of survival she had known before, but the quiet pleasure of safety, the hidden sweetness of being seen as more than an enemy. Her people had told her that humans would eat her, that they would break her. But this one human was doing neither. Instead, he was giving her back pieces of herself she thought she had lost. Her strength, her calm, her hope, she whispered in her mind. I do not understand you, Caldwell, but maybe I want to. When sleep finally came that night, it was not filled with nightmares. It was filled with strange dreams of forests, oceans, and warmth. Dreams she had never known. And when she woke, she realized that the most dangerous thing had already happened. She no longer feared him completely, and once fear is broken, trust is never far behind. The days passed like shadows moving across the walls, slow but steady. And with each passing day, the alien girl felt her heart twist tighter. She was no longer the same prisoner who trembled in fear. She was something else now, caught between two worlds. Her people's voice echoed in her head, telling her humans were monsters, yet the human in front of her kept proving them wrong. Caldwell gave her food, water, warmth, even silence that felt safer than chains. He never mocked her, never struck her, never treated her like less, and because of that, her walls had begun to break, but breaking walls came with danger, because behind those walls were not only questions but loyalty. Loyalty to her people, loyalty to the war they had fought for generations. One evening, the chamber door opened, not for food or light, but for voices, alien voices. Her people's voices. The guards dragged her out, and for the first time since her capture, she saw other prisoners like her, thin, weak, afraid, but their eyes burned with hatred. When they saw her standing near the human warrior, they spat words in their tongue. Traitor, weakling, broken. The words pierced her heart sharper than any blade. Her leaders were there too, tall and cold, their armor shining. They looked at her as if she were dirt under their feet. One of them hissed, "You sit in silence with the human. You take his food, you drink his water, you wear his cloth, you shame us." She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her throat tightened, because she knew they were right in some way. She had accepted what he gave. She had let his mercy touch her. The leader leaned closer, his eyes glowing with fury. "You will prove your loyalty, you will kill him. You will tear away this illusion of kindness, for kindness is a mask, and masks must be broken." Her blood froze. The order rang in her ears like thunder. They wanted her to kill Caldwell, to prove once and for all that humans were monsters and nothing else. When she was dragged back to the chamber, her mind was chaos, her chest heavy with fire and ice. Caldwell was there, sitting as always, his calm eyes watching. But now she could not look at him without hearing her people's command. Her hands shook, her body screamed to obey, but her heart whispered something different, something she did not want to admit, that she no longer wanted to see him fall. That night was the longest she had ever lived. She sat with the blanket still wrapped around her, the music of the small device still echoing in her memory, and she thought of his touch, his voice, his mercy, and she thought of her people, their anger, their hatred, their endless war, and she realized she was standing on a knife's edge. One step toward loyalty, one step toward betrayal, and either step could destroy her. Caldwell finally spoke, his voice steady but quiet. "They asked you to choose." Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. How did he know? But he only looked at her with those unreadable eyes. Calm and heavy, she wanted to scream at him, to ask why he was so calm when her world was falling apart. But the words died in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "If I do not kill you, they will kill me." Her voice shook, filled with anger, fear, and something deeper. Caldwell nodded once, slow, accepting. "Then do what you must." His words were simple, but they cut into her like a blade, because he was giving her the choice. He was giving her freedom even in chains, and freedom was heavier than orders. She lifted her hand slowly, her fingers trembling, imagining a blade there. Imagining the strike, she looked at him. waiting for fear in his eyes, waiting for anger, but there was none. Only calm, only patience, only the same steady strength he always carried. And that made it worse because monsters were easy to kill, but men like him were not. Tears stung her eyes, something she had not felt since she was a child, and she hated it. Hated that this human made her feel weak, hated that he made her feel human too. She dropped her hand and turned away, her voice breaking. "I cannot." The words were quiet, but they were louder than screams because in that moment, she chose not her people, not her war, but her own truth. Caldwell did not move, did not smile, did not gloat. He only said, "Then you are stronger than you think." She clenched her fists, her heart pounding, his calm words digging into her soul. She wanted to hate him, but her hatred was crumbling, and in its place grew something she feared even more: respect. The next day her leaders returned, their eyes sharp, demanding an answer. She stood there, her body shaking but her voice steady. "I will not kill him." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, filled with rage. Her people hissed, called her traitor again. Some even reached for their blades, but Caldwell stood behind her, not striking, not threatening, simply standing, and his calm presence gave her courage. The leaders snarled, promising punishment, promising pain. But as they dragged her away, she felt something strange. Not only fear, but freedom, because she had chosen for herself. And that choice, dangerous as it was, felt more real than any order she had ever obeyed that night. As she returned to the chamber, bruised and broken, Caldwell placed the blanket around her shoulders without a word, and she realized something she could no longer deny. The conflict was no longer between her people and the humans. It was inside her heart, and the war there was far more dangerous than the one outside. The chamber was colder now, not because of the air, but because of the weight pressing down on her heart. The alien girl sat with her back against the wall, her body bruised from the punishment her people had given her, yet her mind was not broken. Not yet, though it felt close. Her hand shook, not from pain, but from the question that refused to leave her, the question of who she truly belonged to. Her people had made their order clear. If she did not kill the human, they would kill her instead. And yet she had refused. She had stood in front of them and said no. A word so small but so heavy, and now that word burned inside her like fire, because it meant she had chosen something. But she still did not know what. Caldwell was there, as always, calm as stone, his eyes following her but never piercing, his silence giving her space to breathe. He did not ask what had been done to her. He did not ask what choice she had made. He already knew. His calmness said it all. He knew she was torn, and he would not force her, and that made the weight on her chest even heavier that night. She dreamed, but the dream was not of battlefields, not of chains, not of fear. The dream was of two paths, one leading back to her people, their faces sharp with anger, their voices filled with hatred, the other leading toward the human, his calm figure waiting, silent but steady. She walked between the two paths, her feet sinking into the ground, unable to choose. The dream ended with her screaming into the void when she woke. Sweat clung to her skin and her breath came heavy. Caldwell was still there, sitting against the wall, his eyes opening as if he had been awake the whole time. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask why he did not make it easier. But his silence was the same as always, and it forced her to face the choice herself. The next day the chamber door opened again. Her leaders entered, their armor shining, their eyes full of fury. They brought her into the center of the room. Caldwell was pulled to his feet, his arms bound with chains. Though even bound, he looked unshaken. The leader spoke, his voice sharp like glass. "Now you will prove once and for all where you stand." And he pushed a blade into her hands. The blade was cold, heavy, its edge gleaming under the light. Her hands shook as she held it. The weight felt unbearable, heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. Because this weapon was not just steel. It was a choice that could not be undone. The leader hissed again, "Kill him or die with him." Her heart thundered in her chest. Her breath shallow, she looked at Caldwell, his eyes calm, steady, patient, as if he already knew the outcome. He did not beg, did not plead, did not show fear. He only looked at her, and in that look she saw everything. The water he had given her, the blanket he had placed around her shoulders, the music that had touched her soul, and the words he had spoken. "Because you are alive," her arms trembled, the blade shook in her grip. Her people shouted at her, traitor, coward, weakling. Their voices filled the chamber like a storm, yet Caldwell's silence was louder. his calm presence heavier than their screams. She thought of the nights she had spent in fear, the mornings she had woken in warmth, and she realized the truth she had been avoiding. She did not fear him anymore, she feared herself. She feared the choice she was about to make. She raised the blade. The leader smiled in victory, expecting blood, expecting her to strike, but at the last moment her voice rang out, breaking the storm. No, the word echoed through the chamber. Sharp and final, she dropped the blade, letting it crash against the floor. Her hands empty, her body shaking, but her heart steady for the first time. Her people roared in fury, rushing forward, their weapons drawn, ready to end both of them. But she stepped in front of Caldwell, her arms spread wide, her voice breaking but strong. "You will not touch him." The leaders froze for a moment. Shocked by her defiance, she was one of them, yet she now stood against them. Her loyalty shattered. Her heart laid bare. Caldwell did not move. He did not strike. He did not even lift his chained arms. He simply stood behind her, silent, calm, letting her choice be the shield. And in that silence she realized the truth. Humans were dangerous not because they killed, but because they inspired choices, because they showed mercy where none was expected. And mercy was more powerful than fear. The leaders snarled, promising pain, promising death. But in her heart, the decision was already made. She would not betray the man who had shown her kindness. She would not return to a people who only demanded blood. If she had to fall, she would fall standing. And she would fall on the side of truth that night. As the chamber closed once more, she sat with the blanket around her shoulders, her body still shaking from what she had done. But inside, a strange peace had begun to grow. The choice had been made, and though it might cost her life, it had given her something greater than survival. It had given her freedom. The chamber felt different now, heavy with the echo of her choice. The alien girl sat with the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, her body sore, her heart racing. Yet there was a strange stillness inside her, the kind of stillness that came after a storm. She had stood in front of her people. She had refused to kill, and though they had cursed her, though they had beaten her, she was still alive. And so was Caldwell. He sat across from her, chains still binding his arms, but his calmness was the same as ever. His eyes steady, his silence stronger than words. She wanted to ask him why he had not fought, why he had let her stand between him and death. But deep inside, she already knew the answer. Because this was never about weapons, this was about choice. And he had given her the freedom to make it. Her people were not done. Their hatred was not broken. The leaders returned the next day with more soldiers. The chamber filled with voices sharp as blades. "She is a traitor!" they shouted. "Kill them both! Show no mercy." But even as they spoke, not all faces burned with anger. Some were uncertain. Some were curious. Some looked at Caldwell with the same question she once carried. Why was this human not the monster they had been taught to fear? The leader raised his weapon. Pointing it at Caldwell's chest, the girl stepped forward again, her body weak but her voice strong. "If you strike him, you strike me too?" The chamber shook with gasps. Her defiance cut through the noise like lightning. The leader snarled, "You would die for him." And she answered, "No. I will live because of him." Her words cracked the air. And in that moment, the room no longer belonged to her leaders. It belonged to her choice. Caldwell did not move. His silence was his strength, his calmness, his weapon. He looked at the crowd, not with anger, not with fear, but with patience, as if he was waiting for them to see the truth for themselves, and slowly, some of them did. One soldier lowered his weapon, then another, their eyes shifting from hatred to doubt, because doubt was more dangerous to lies than any blade. The leader roared in fury, swinging his weapon down, but before the strike could fall, Caldwell stepped forward, chains clinking, his voice deep and steady. The first time he had spoken more than a few words. "We do not need more blood." The chamber froze. The sound of his voice filled every corner, strong yet calm, firm yet merciful, and in that moment, his words carried more power than the leader's orders. The alien girl felt her heart pound, her body trembling, not with fear but with something else, hope, because she saw it in the faces around her. The cracks forming, the walls breaking, the lies unraveling. Her people had been told humans only destroyed, but now they were witnessing something different. A human choosing peace even in chains, the leader shouted again, calling them cowards, traitors, fools. But his voice no longer carried the same weight. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowered further, their eyes locked on the human who refused to strike back, and on the girl who refused to betray him. She realized then that their defiance together was stronger than any weapon, stronger than fear, stronger than lies. When the leader raised his weapon once more, the girl moved before thinking, stepping in front of Caldwell again, but this time, Caldwell lifted his bound arms and placed them gently on her shoulders. Pulling her back, his voice calm, no more. His eyes met hers, steady, patient, and she understood. He was not asking her to shield him. He was teaching her that mercy was not weakness. Mercy was strength. The silence grew heavy. The soldiers stared, their hands shaking, the leader's rage burning. But the choice was no longer his to make. The choice now belonged to every eye in that chamber. And slowly, one by one, weapons dropped to the ground. The sound of metal striking stone filled the air. Louder than any battle cry, louder than any order. The leader's face twisted in fury, but his power was gone, shattered by the sight of mercy stronger than fear. The alien girl's knees buckled, tears burning her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of the moment. She looked at Caldwell, her voice breaking. "They will never forgive me." And he answered softly, "Then let them learn." The words carried no cruelty, only strength, only patience. And she realized then that she was no longer just his prisoner. She was his witness, his ally, his proof that humans were more than monsters. The leader was dragged away by his own soldiers, shouting, cursing, his voice growing smaller. The chamber quiet once more, the girl stood trembling. But inside she felt a fire burning brighter than ever before she had chosen, and her choice had sparked something greater than herself, something that might change the war. Caldwell stepped closer, his chains still heavy, but his presence still calm. He looked at her, and though his lips did not smile, his eyes did, and in that silent moment she knew. The most dangerous weapon humans carried was not their strength, not their machines, not their fire, it was their mercy, their ability to give life where others only expected death. She had expected the human to eat her, to break her, to destroy her. But instead he had given her something else, something her people had never shown. The hidden pleasure of trust, the gift of mercy, and the freedom of choice. And as she stood beside him, her heart steady for the first time, she knew the truth. Mercy had won.